Good catch. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome to Harvard College. Welcome to the Phillips Brooks House Association's famed Parlor Room, and welcome to the 10th Annual Engaged Scholarship and Social Justice Conference here at Harvard College. It's my pleasure to kick off one of my favorite Harvard College events. It's the only dedicated research conference for undergraduates, and this is a fantastic opportunity for students, staff, faculty to learn in a community with others who are also creating knowledge on a plethora of social justice-related topics. I'm Alta Mauro. I'm the Associate Dean for Inclusion and Belonging. I take she, her pronouns. I'm very happy to be here with y'all. One such critical social justice topic is that of land and subsequently space, place, inhabitants, ownership, belonging, displacement, rights, legacy, remembrance, and reckoning. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants in what is known currently as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. And I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge the complicated privilege we have to be together here in this particular place and to encourage us to, in all of our presenting and problematizing today and tomorrow and beyond, to not only remember, but to reflect on the lingering impact of injustices of the past will have on our attempts at cultivating justice in the present. We're grateful to have as our conference chair this year and our faculty chair, Ken Darrie Thomas, who is a lecturer on environmental science and public policy and the Alston Burr resident dean of Cabot House. Any Cabot House people? Not yet? Okay, sure.
Not yet.
Not yet. Ken is a Trinidad and Tobago native. I started to fake a sort of Trinity accent when I said that, but there's enough foolishness in the world, so I thought I would leave it alone. Ken attended the University of West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad, where he studied chemical and process engineering. He went on to complete a Master's of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of West Indies in 2006, before moving directly on to his doctorate, which he completed in 2010 from the University of South Florida in Civil Engineering, concentrating on environmental engineering and water resources. Ken's dissertation is entitled Ecotourism and Water Quality, Linking Management, Activities, and Sustainability Indicators in the Caribbean. As you may imagine from his own dissertation title, he is passionate about sustainability and the practice of sustainable actions in our daily lives. I'm really grateful to Ken for the many hours that he has given to planning the committee and shaping ESSJ 2025 and for modeling engaged scholarship for undergraduate researchers whose work will be highlighted across the sessions. Thank you too to our guest faculty who are here very graciously and who will present their work as examples of embodying their own values. I'm really grateful to my colleagues at the Harvard Foundation and to the Center for Public Service and Engaged Scholarship for their dedication in offering the intellectually rigorous, philosophically ethical, and empowering and deep communal space that is ESSJ. There's Varsha. I was like, this is Varsha's baby, really? Mm-hmm. And it's quite a powerful offering for the college, and I know Varsha's very proud of it. I really want to thank her for her continued partnership and for allowing me to partner in getting us here to the 10th annual ESSJ. So on behalf of Harvard College, I thank everybody for participating in advance. Thank you for your good ideas, good energy, ways that you're showing up for yourselves and for each other, for the support and attention and feedback that you'll give our presenters, and just for the great energy across this evening and tomorrow. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Mauro. So I'm Ken Thomas, and I use the He series. And I was so elated to be asked to do this, both by Varsha and Alta, when they told me the conference theme for this year was going to be environmental justice. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. Because even as an engineer, for me, this was something that is a through line for my academic trajectory and the work that I do now, right? And I want it, and I'm at a certain age where I need these, so please ignore them, but listen. When we say environmental justice, I want it to be clear what we're talking about here, right? So this is the right to a safe, healthy, productive, and sustainable environment for all, right? So this is something that, growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, I experienced firsthand a lot of injustices. Growing up in rural Trinidad and Tobago, where we had an abundance of oil and gas, My dad worked in the oil and gas industry. It was something you saw oil just coming out of people's yards, and it was just commonplace, the everydayness of it, and people just playing among it. This was a while back, right? I'm not going to date myself, but this was a while back. But this was just the type of thing that was common, and the government did nothing about it, right? It was a government-run industry where these injustices in certain areas were just everywhere. So I grew up with this, not thinking about it really as a young child or even as a young adult, really, and going into college. Why did I choose to do chemical and process engineering? Well, I came from a background of a father who worked in the industry as an electrician, had a high school education, a mother who is still a homemaker, never finished high school, right? So there was this thing of pushing us into places where achievement was going to be a thing for us to take care of the family, right? And the family needs. We know, some of us, the black tax that is expected when you are able to attain. So for me, there was this thing of, okay, what if a couple of the jobs that are available at the time, and chemical and process engineering was one of the higher paid jobs. So you had the aptitude to get in there, so that's where I went. But in the course of that study, I realized, it was like my junior summer internship at the petroleum company that my dad worked at, that there was this wanton disregard for how people in the country really engage with oil and gas and the impacts on their well-being. So this whole idea of environmental justice really became prevalent for me and became this thing that I'm like, okay, I cannot just be doing chemical engineering and be adding to just the economic gain, right? And taking away from the health of my people. So I immediately decided that I was going to study environmental engineering so that I can try and make a difference for the people in the Caribbean. So I did that, and I eventually, at the end of that master's, went and worked for the equivalent of the EPA in Trinidad, and I worked there as an environmental manager for a few years when I realized, I need more training, and I went on to do the doctorate, right? So for me, this is really, really something that I'm passionate about, and it really is a true line in the work that I've done and continue to do and teach about here. And I was so excited and elated to be asked to chair this conference and really choose these esteemed panelists here. But before we get on to the panel, I want us to think about why we're actually here, right? What is this conference about? So this conference is rooted in engaged scholarship, right? And this is all about strategic actions to bring social change based on scholarship, right? A lot of the scholarship that we will hear from you all tomorrow. We can't wait for that. That's always the fun part. But for me, I think as we move through the conference, we really need to think about what is actionable. What can we do, right? And when I think about that, I always think about it in a three-pronged approach in terms of time, talent, and treasure. Right? We have to think about it. And treasure does not necessarily mean money, right? It does not necessarily mean that if you are like me and broke, right, and do not have much. But our treasure includes people in our networks, connections, etc. So what can we actually do, right? Even now as undergraduates, what can we do? I really call us to think about what that may be for you. So, with that, I want to turn to our panel, who I'm so happy that they're here. And we have Dr. Wylin Wilson from Duke University, Dr. Bridgette King from the University of Kentucky, and Dr. Marquita Smith from the University of Mississippi. And I will ask them to introduce themselves however they wish, and also give us an idea of the work that they do to affect social change.
I think you're first.
Okay, you want me to start? I shall start then, no worries. All right. Hello, everyone. It is just absolutely wonderful to be here with you, to share this time together. So, a little bit about myself. I am Wylin Wilson. I'm on faculty at Duke Divinity School. And my area of research falls in theological ethics, but also the intersection of bioethics with theology and gender. So what's really important in terms of how my work really intersects with social justice and community engagement is actually the framework that I work out of, right? So the framework that I use is womanist theological ethics framework, womanist bioethics. And not sure how many of you know what womanism is, so I'll just quickly say womanism is a theoretical and a social change framework. And that's why I work out of it, right? And it's a framework that basically, it was in response to the fact that Western philosophy, Western theology left out and neglected voices, different perspectives of particularly minoritized individuals. And the one with respect to womanism is Black women and other women of color. So that framework, what's really important about it is it's inclusive. It's really inclusive. It uses as its starting point the experience, the lived experience of Black women and other women of color. But the goal of womanism is actually for the healing, the flourishing, the health, the thriving of humanity, no matter your gender, no matter your race, class, anything, right? And so that's what drew me to it, was because it's extremely inclusive. And my research and my work has always been focused on vulnerable populations. I had an experience sort of like you growing up experiencing environmental injustice, understanding this notion of sacrifice zones, right, of individuals living in, or we call them vulnerable populations, living in places that experience economic injustice disproportionately. And so for me, when we look at vulnerability, what's most important about vulnerability is that you don't see it as, these folks are deficient, right? There's something wrong with them, they're pathological. Actually, vulnerability is something it's a cultural production, right? We all have a hand in whether or not, folks around us are falling within vulnerable populations, whether it be kind of historically, right, from historical kinds of power structures and relationships, or just because institutions may, advantage some while disadvantaging others and whatnot. So my work, the reason why it's important is for us to get an adequate understanding of what justice means in human relations. It often requires that we start with the needs of those who are most vulnerable among us, right? And if we listen to folk who are made vulnerable, right, because of the circumstances that we have created, right, through our economic, political, social, kinds of relationships and actions. If we listen to them, we can get a better understanding, a clearer understanding of what some of our concepts like respect and dignity and whatnot really mean, right, from a different perspective. And that's what's really, really important. And that's why I enjoy the work that I do, right? Being inclusive, trying to not just rely on one perspective and one story to tell us who we are and how we should be, but to listen to various voices, various perspectives, to include various approaches so that we can do better and be better together. Yeah.
I thought I should have gone first. It's going to pale in comparison. So my name is Dr. Bridgette King. I'm an associate professor at the University of Kentucky. I'm a political scientist. I would like to send a special shout out to the ODU people in the building because I went to Hampton. I didn't go to ODU, but I went to Hampton, so hello. Hey, y'all.
I taught at Hampton.
So I, as a political scientist, I study elections, which was a poor life choice. But so not so much like the consequences or the outcomes, so the winners or the losers. I'm more so interested in the structures that shape participation. And so if we look at the history of the US, one of the things that we know is that structures over time have been used to facilitate participation amongst larger groups of individuals or curtail participation amongst smaller groups of individuals, right? So whether it be things like poll taxes, literacy tests, et cetera. And so even in 2025, if you happen to be paying attention, we can see that within states and even at local governments to a certain level, and even at the federal government now with potential pending legislation, we continue to see that institutions as rules continue to shape and structure who is and who isn't allowed to have full access to participation, specifically as it comes to voting, which is the primary way that citizens continue to communicate their preferences to government. And so from those institutions, we know that they impact participation, not only who, but how often, et cetera. We know institutions can also shape the choices that are actually accessible to people. And we know institutions can also shape perceptions and opinions. And the other thing we know is that changes to the structures around participation impact people differently. So this will make sense. We're going to take a little aside. So when I went to graduate school, I went to become a probation officer, but specifically a juvenile probation officer because I wanted to save the youth. It's probably important to know I'm a product of social workers, so that probably had a lot to do with it. But you can kind of imagine like the conversations I had. My parents are also divorced, but like the conversations I would have with my mother, specifically because she worked in children and family services, the people who take the children from their parents, yes. And so we would have interesting conversations about which populations of people that organization that she works at impacts the most. And not shockingly, it was families of color, but also people who are poor, right? Because in the eyes of many social workers, living in poverty is a form of abuse. Ipso facto, people would have their children taken away from them. So those are sort of the discussions that I grew up, I was an angry little child, growing up sort of having with my mother. And so when I got to grad school, I guess there was a part of me that was still like, I will help people in some kind of way. But then I had an advisor who was the dean of the grad school who told me I should get a Ph.D. And I don't really like working. So staying in school felt like a really good life choice for me. So I went off to get a PhD at the same school. But it was through that process that I was exposed to sort of like beyond just like I voted, I participated, like I watched the election being called, when there was a federal election. But like I wasn't really attuned to sort of like the mechanics of what was happening. So it was in my PhD program that like I still kept my focus and interest in criminal justice impacted persons. Mm-hmm. And then as my interest in elections grew, I realized that like as a nation, there are citizens that we continue to regale to a second-class citizenship. So people who are incarcerated, who lose their right to vote and rights to other access and spaces. So it became sort of the intersection between the two things I'm really interested in. One, the sort of the structure of participation and how it impacts individuals, but also how we have constructed certain populations of people to sort of be unworthy and also powerless, such that they, even having all the hallmarks of citizenship, are not allowed to fully participate in the process. Yeah. And so it's all very depressing, but it's kind of where my research kind of lands. So whether thinking about things like prison gerrymandering and what that does for sort of descriptive representation or substantive representation, or thinking about when people go to vote in person, how are those experiences varied by where you live or the characteristic that you embody, right? So these are all things that, even outside of presidential elections, right? We have midterm elections, we have local elections, right? So these are all things that impact how people experience democracy, and the extent to which, sort of big democracy is something that is accessible and welcoming to all people. So it's a busy time for me right now. But that's a little bit about what I do.
Okay. Thank you guys for the invitation to speak today. I'm Dr. Marquita Smith, and I'm an Associate Dean for Grad Programs and Research at the University of Mississippi School of Journalism and New Media. And so I am kind of a combination of the two after spending almost 2 decades as a newsroom leader and an editor at various newspapers around the country. I now find myself in the center of higher ed and kind of in the academy. And so my work sits at the intersection of media, leadership, and social justice, often focusing on underrepresented communities, particularly gender and media. So my scholarship is grounded in the belief that communication, whether through journalism, media literacy, or academic research, has the power to not only shape how we understand the world, but how we choose to engage in it. In both my research and my teaching, I focus on elevating marginalized voices, particularly with global and transnational contexts. So I do a lot of work with examining media and ecosystems in West Africa, and designing curriculum that challenge students to consider ethical leadership. And my goal is always to help students think critically. And so I'm excited to be here to see your presentations tomorrow, but also to help students think about how to lead with purpose. Social change isn't something abstract. It's something that we practice daily through our words, through our decisions, through our willingness to ask the difficult questions. And for somebody who spent my first career in the news media business, I take that role very seriously. And so this week, for the next couple of days, I hope that we can challenge you about what questions are you asking and to whom are you asking them, and to think about it. So I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about those things, but mostly, my work centers on social justice in terms of some environmental aspects, in terms of how media play a role in framing these narratives, the narrative intelligence, what narratives are out there and why are they out there, and really who is telling the stories. So whose voice are you hearing about what conversations and what conversations are missing from the landscape? And so my approach is a bit different. But one that takes a little bit of an analytical hand in terms of determining not always what you hear, but what is it that you don't hear.
Well, thank you all for that. So we have panelists that are from very, very different backgrounds here, right? And it's partially because our panel is actually entitled Environmental Justice in Uncertain Times. Right, and we certainly understand what some of those uncertain times are, and we can all think of what is to come. So we're really thankful that we have these thought leaders coming from these different areas to help us think about how we prepare for environmental justice in these uncertain times and then the uncertain times to come. So we keep using the term environment, and I want to be clear, although I'm an environmental engineer, we do have this broad definition of environment that we have been using and will continue to use. I just want to clarify that. So environment for us and for this conference is considered in its totality to include the ecological, physical, social, political, aesthetic, and economic environments, right? So all encompassing, right? Hence the reason that we have experts coming from all different fields that are tackling environmental justice and injustices through their works in many different areas, as do you, which is something that excites us to see the work that you will be presenting tomorrow. So to get going with some more targeted questions, We do have environmental justices and injustices that have been prevalent for as long as there have been oppressive systems, right? And it is not surprising that even now that they exist, and they're part of the everydayness for some people, as it was for me growing up, right? So one of those populations includes the incarcerated, and Dr. King, you already alluded to working in that area. So I have a question for you, because in a very recent publication of yours in 2022, Redistricting and Incarceration, Examining the Electoral Consequences of New York's Prohibition on Prison Gerrymandering, it is clear that the injustices for the incarcerated continue. What changes do you envision coming under the current administration for the incarcerated? Is there anything we can really do about it?
Okay. So before I answer that, do you all know what prison gerrymandering is? I feel like does anyone not know? Thank you for being honest. Okay. So we know every 10 years the Census Bureau counts the people, right? And so the Census Bureau uses a term that I can't remember right now, but it is your most frequent residence, like where you lay your head. And so there are some populations where the Census Bureau allows you to be counted, not physically where you are, but where you were most recently. And so college students are an example, right? Like you might be counted at school, you might be counted at home if you're a citizen. Military personnel, similarly, you might be counted at your base, or you could be counted like at the home where you actually live. So the population of people they don't extend this exception to are people who are incarcerated in state and federal prisons. So when a state legislature, for example, gets data from the Census Bureau about where people who are incarcerated are counted at the facility where they are incarcerated as opposed to the community that they came from. And so since a lot of our prisons are in rural areas, that basically creates what we call phantom districts, where there are people who are citizens who are incarcerated, but they make up the primary population of the district, even though they themselves are not actually allowed to vote. So it might be the prison itself. Let's say there's 5,000 people in the prison and like maybe 300 people who work at the prison. This is a poor example. You'd have a district of 5,300 people, but of those 5,300 people, only 300 of them are actually allowed to participate in elections. So that's what prison gerrymandering is. And so in thinking of outcomes, it also tends to shift the vote share to rural areas. There are both Republican and Democratic prison gerrymanders, so they don't necessarily help one party versus the other. And so there have been reforms across states to, instead of counting incarcerated persons in the prison, to actually count them back in the communities where they live. So sort of shifting actual political power back to those communities, which are often urban, underserviced, oftentimes lower economic status, back to the communities as opposed to these rural areas where the phantom prisons exist. And so I am getting to answer your question. So before the 2020 census, the Census Bureau asked, for public comment, do you think what should we do about most recent residents, particularly for people who are incarcerated? They got over 77,000 comments. Of those comments, maybe 100 of those 77,000 suggested that people in prison should be counted in their institutions where they're housed, as opposed to where they actually live. The Census Bureau basically was like, thank you, but no thank you. We are going to continue to count incarcerated persons in the prison, as opposed to in their homes. So thinking forward to 2030, they've already put out the call for public comment and what they're going to do. I anticipate they will continue to count incarcerated persons in the prison. But of those 12 plus states that have banned prison gerrymandering, it makes it harder for them to do their jobs because the data to figure out where people live comes from the Census Bureau. So they then are trying to, with limited cooperation from corrections facilities, trying to sort of move people from where they're housed to where they actually live. And so it's hard at the state level, but it's even harder trying to move people who are in federal prisons to where their actual previous homes, because the Federal Bureau of Prisons has basically been like, no, thank you, we're not going to help you, good luck. So in terms of what I anticipate coming from this administration, at least if we think about executive branch agencies, I think they will continue to count incarcerated persons in the prisons, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons will continue to not be helpful in any meaningful way. That said, though, I mean, there is an increasing number of states, though, who are actively willing to stop this practice, but the information that they need to do it effectively and efficiently, unfortunately, they can't get because the federal government continues to be like, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Great.
I know, right?
Well, how do we move on? But I guess we have to, right? That's part of the uncertainty of these times. We still have to push through.
That's true,
So
yes.
we'll push through to another group of people that are often disenfranchised, and as unfortunate as it is, and Dr. Wilson, you know all too well, about Black women, right? And it's one of those groups that for quite a while, it's been well documented that this is a group where environmental injustices continue to work in ways that does not affect other groups on the same levels in terms of negative effects, right? So even in 1962, Malcolm X said, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the Black woman. The most neglected person in America is the Black woman. Beyonce even reminded us of this. You all remember? Okay, in 2016, the Lemonade album, right? Even your recent book, which we all have, is alluding and reminds us that Black women are still very much affected by the negative impacts of their environment more than any other group of people. Why is this still the case, and what do we need to do to help make some of these injustices right?
Yeah. So when we look at the question of why this is the case, it's really important to kind of look at it through a historical lens, right? Which is really why it's dangerous for us to turn our backs on history and say, we have to throw out everything if we don't like some things. The important thing about history is that it reveals so much of us, of who we are, whether we like it or not. A lot of people will look at history and say, oh, well, but that's not who we are. Yes, it is. When we get a full story, when we're not leaving out different perspectives and voices, it is who we are. And it's okay. Take this for instance. How many of y'all, when you go home for maybe a holiday or something, and somebody brings up something, and everybody's doing the side eye and whispering, y'all know we're not supposed to talk about that. Right? Kind of those family secrets. Every family has the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have stuff we don't like to talk about. We have stuff we don't want to own up to, right? So yes, the history that we see, it is us. It's who we are. So it's important to take a historical lens because historically, there really has been a devaluation of minoritized bodies in this nation, whether they are, enslaved Africans, indigenous, Native Americans, Asian American, just look throughout history, and there really has been that very significant devaluation of minoritized bodies. But then, secondly, and particularly when we're looking at Black women, Black and other women of color, what's also important is how the pain and the suffering of Black folk in this nation has been normalized, right? It started during enslavement. And now we don't even question how much we have normalized the pain and misery of certain populations in this country. we don't even question it, right? And so I think that is truly part of the problem, and it's hard to own up to that, right? Like, it's even hard for me to think through and to dig into history. In my research, I cry because it's painful to look at our history, right? I shed my tears and then I move on, right? Because there's work to be done. So you get it out, but you get back to the work. So I think those are the two main things why we really still do that. And then thirdly, looking at women's experience. I'll start with the CDC. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had a campaign, and I don't know if how many of you saw the Hear Her campaign? Okay, it's a few, okay. Well, they had a campaign, the Hear Her campaign, and it was a campaign really focused on dealing with maternal health, because maternal health, our nation has a maternal health crisis, like not even whittling it down to the various populations, like indigenous and Black women who have the highest maternal mortality rates in this nation, but just across the board, real issue, right, in our country. And so the CDC said, we're gonna have this Hear Her campaign, because what they were getting at is how a lot of women's voices were not being heard. One, women weren't being listened to, but then two, they weren't being taken seriously. And so the Hear Her campaign was really important in saying, look, if you have a woman or a woman identifying person, you must listen, take them seriously, what they're saying, right? Because we all do know our bodies better than anybody else, right? And so those, I think those are a few things. Now, well, what can we do? What we can do is, the one thing of listening, taking folks seriously. But I think an even more important thing that we can do is, at an individual level, you said something that is really important, because this is how I really do see social justice and the work that I do, is that it's an everyday thing. Like, this is very much a part of who I am, right? So when I wake up, I really do think about, how do I want to show up in the world today, right? What's driving me? What's really important? What do I really value? And so I think at the individual level, at that level, we really do need to do more kind of interrogation of ourselves, of what we really do value, of how we see others. Because a lot of times, my God, just notice your thoughts when certain people approach you on the street, or when you're listening to certain people. Just take time and just become aware of your thoughts. Like, observe your thoughts, observe your body, your embodiment, observe your response to one another. Observe who you value and why you value that person. I think we really, it need the kind of change that we want to see really does begin at that just really deep level in ourselves, right? Just kind of paying attention, and then it will spill over. It will definitely spill over, yeah.
Well, I totally get how, being into ourselves and centering ourselves and how we see ourselves being super important for us. But then sometimes representation, Dr. Smith, might not meet that narrative, right? It might be so different, what we see through journalistic outlets being so different from what we know to be true. So this whole representation by the media is something that is absolutely critical. when it comes to this whole realm of environmental justice or environmental injustices. So media representation theory examines the way in which media creates and reinforces social norms, stereotypes, and power structures. In recent times, media representation, inclusive of social media, has not been reliable in accurately portraying the environmental injustices experienced by so many of our citizens. In the uncertain times during which we find ourselves, good journalism is needed more than ever, so people are properly informed, all people. Do you envision journalism in all of its forms being up to this task? And then how do we decipher sense from nonsense?
Yeah, misinformation and disinformation, as you know, is running rampant. And most of you are consuming your news via social media and through digital channels. And that's incredibly difficult, particularly with AI-generated content and deep fakes, which is one of the things that that we research my colleague is a deep fake expert. And so both in visual communications and written communication, you're not sure what you're looking at. And you don't know if it's auto-generated or if it's actually fact. And so I always tell people to pause, right? And so I'm actually passing out old school wooden commas that I have painted red. And before if you see me in the hallway, I may give you one. And it says, wait, when you hear some information, you need to pause and you need to fact check and you need to verify what's happening with that. And so I want to just be clear that representation matters. And so who is writing these stories and who is producing those stories matter. If you have fewer and fewer people of color, fewer and fewer people who represent the populations that we're supposed to be profiling or highlighting, then it becomes a problem. And so these are not new challenges. When I was in the newsroom 15 years ago, I was having these same conversations about who's covering what local communities where. With more and more people creating products, media products, it's important that people who look like you all reflect the stories of the communities that you're trying to cover. So how do you discern from the nonsense? You first have to pause and fact check. You need to check 2 other sources. Because if you're watching Fox News, it might say one thing. And if you're looking at MSNBC, it's going to say something completely different. And so where are your other sources? And so you guys are not really consuming TV news. But if you're on TikTok, can you really say that that's a valid fact that's on there? And so if you're getting information from TikTok, you might want to go to a traditional media source to see what's being reported from whom is reporting it. And so I think it's really important to recognize that there are a lot of environmental issues that are often neglected. And just as my colleague said, Dr. Wilson, the historical context is you cannot have historical context on X. All right, so if you got any facts from X, you probably don't have the whole picture. I'm just willing to bet and say that much. And if you're looking at coverage of environmental issues, including educations, you're not going to know about if it's nonpartisan or partisan on Instagram.
That's
right. It's on the gram. You don't know who's funding it. You don't know where it came from. All of the things. And so, we take these things for granted. And I'm not knocking. I'm glad you're consuming some information. Just be clear about that. But you have to pause and recognize that without any sources, you're very trusting of the products that you consume and that you watch for entertainment purposes and all of the things. It's just slowly seeping in a narrative, right? And so I started off talking about the importance of narrative intelligence. And you guys are a part of that. It's not just used in the shape of national security. We're talking about your intelligence and ability to realize what is legit, what is factual, what is accurate. But you have to work at it a lot more if you're consuming most of your facts from social media.
Well, thank you for that. We are talking to a room full of people who are in agreement with a lot of these things, right? And are going to be people that are fighting the fight. So I really want us to turn the table a little bit and really talk to these young people. Because thankfully, you all are interested in doing the work that we want many, or if possible, all of our students to do. So thank you for that. But sometimes we know that by listening to people like MLK, who told us that we need to fight the good fight, and listening to Dr. Cornel West, who reminds us that we should continue to fight and wear our cemetery clothes until the fight is over. So if you have to get in the grave, you're ready. But what does that mean? What does that mean for you as a young person on your campus, trying to be an activist for the right thing, for all these environmental justice causes, right? So that's what I want to ask all of us here about. So activism by our students on college campuses rightfully intensify in uncertain times like these. What advice do you have for our students who are attempting to challenge global injustices on their campuses? In any order.
Yeah, I'll jump in and start here. First of all, I want to just affirm the energy and the clarity that students bring to activism. I think it's really important to say that you have a role in a space. Really, often you're the moral compass of your institutions, and I don't want you to lose sight of that. I'm a big proponent of student media, radio, newspapers, podcasts, whatever you might be producing. And in these uncertain times, your voice is more vital than it's ever been before. And so hear me when I say that. My advice is for you to ground your activism in deep learning and strategic action. And so I think attending a conference just like this is a good way for you to really start to explore ways in which you can engage. There is a lot of individual soul searching that has to happen for you to decide, as Dr. West said, to be prepared to have a cost. But I do think it's super important that you recognize that it is a collective, that you can do this work, and to not lose sight of that. And so understand that the historical context, which we keep talking about, of the movements you're a part of, and align those who share the commitment to justice, not just in spirit, but also in practice. So creating a cohort. Dr. King talked about fighting the good fight, and Dr. West reminds us to put on our cemetery clothes. But what he's not saying is for you to be a martyr. What they're talking about is to do things with integrity. It also means to do things with endurance, and to understand that for such a time as this, there really is a cause. It means taking care of yourself. It also means taking care of your community, so that whatever you begin to engage in can be more than a spark, and so that it can be sustained. And so I think I see you all boycotting. I saw the TikTok list of people who were pro this or pro that or anti this or anti that. And you're not shopping at places. My goddaughter was like, I can't go to McDonald's. I'm done with them, right? And one day she was fiending for a filet of fish sandwich, and she said, "Hey, I'm not doing it." And so I see the resolve in her saying, "I'm not going to support people who are warmongers," or whatever your humanity or your cause is for the day. People are engaging from places where they're taking action, and they're bringing their friends with them. And so I just want to encourage you all that you are vital to this work in ways in which perhaps you have not even imagined yet. But take it seriously. Let people hear what's on your mind. Let folks know what you're really concerned about, and figure out what your game plan is, because you do have power, and you are necessary and needed.
Yeah, I want to pick up on your point of creating community. You really do need to have a community of your peers and beyond, right? Who are backing you and supporting you in this work. I have a colleague he's a lawyer, environmental justice lawyer, and his life has been threatened because he's working on behalf of community groups in our state who are experiencing environmental injustice. But he has a group of us who have his back. Whether it be, those of us who he can call if he just needs to cry and say, oh my gosh, these folks are threatening my life, what am I going to, or whether it be, him needing to lawyer up, with his own folk or, whatever it is, right? Just creating community that will absolutely support and sustain you through the work, through this very hard work of, social activism, I think is something that we can easily neglect because you really get caught up in, doing the work. We got to do the work, but really nurturing those kinds of sustaining relationships that are going to be buffers for you and help you refresh and rejuvenate and just to help keep you going. Sometimes you just need folk who you can call on a really bad day and they will say, yeah, but you're not in this alone. We got your back, right? Or whatever it is that you need to hear, right? So I think that's something really important.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Jokingly, I have a friend who's my get out of jail person, right? She's got my one credit card that she's had for 20 years, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to be an activist and you're going to protest, understand that arrests may come, right? Like, don't get it twisted. I live in Mississippi. I could go to jail any day for some of my perspectives, right? And so I got one friend that has had my credit card for 20 years, and when they send a new one, I always mail it to her because she's the person who knows that this might be the day that you have to come get me. And so that community can be a lot of different things.
That's right.
But that's the cost I'm willing to pay, right? So that's the grave clothes, that if I'm standing on the side of right and it gets me booked and jailed, I'm ready, right? And so I even have a contingency plan that she can come and get me and not have to use her own resources if they take credit. If not, it might be problematic. But just there, think through it. She got the pen. She might can get cash out and get me out. But be thinking, how what your community looks like and what supports you need. All joking aside, yeah.
Amen. So I guess I'll say, my thought would be to consider multiple forms of participation. So boycotting, yes. Protesting, yes. But I think, though, at the end of the day, regardless of the issue you care about, there is some person or persons who have been elected by some group of people who are in position to change the thing that you disagree with. And I also fully recognize that in our current time and space, it is very easy to feel like voting doesn't matter, right? Because there's so many issues and they seem so big and they seem in many ways so far removed from our day-to-day lives. But a lot of the challenges currently facing the nation, they don't start with the Supreme Court making a decision, right? Because before we get to the Supreme Court, we got to go through all the lower courts, right? And if we're particularly thinking about state Supreme Courts, most of those people are elected, right? So I think part of it is thinking about sort of multiple forms of participation, but also where are the places in our decentralized democratic structure that you can attack them at multiple levels, right? Because we vote locally. Well, we do, but we don't. We vote locally. We can. You can. Yes, we can. But I mean, there are a lot of mayoral races that are decided by 50 votes or less. There are city council races that are decided by 1. So if your concern is what people are being taught in schools in your community, the people on the school board are also elected, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I would say is like, particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed and like the actions you're taking are not having sort of very clear outcomes that align with your goals. I would think about that's not closer to home, I guess I'll say, actions you can take that can also have significant impacts on how the people you care about experience whatever issue it is that you're concerned with, right? We can think about sanctuary cities, for example, how state legislatures are stripping cities' power away from them so they can't make decisions for themselves. We might think about states taking more action on issues of women's health and access to maternal care, right? So I'll just say this, I think in the US have done you all a major disservice in your K through 12 education in terms of how we've talked to you about the government, how it works and what it is. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about Congress, presidency, and the courts for good reason, but there's so many subnational offices and individuals who are making decisions that impact your lives daily in many ways that exceed what the people in Congress do or don't do. So I guess my advice is multiple approaches to activism, but also sort of focusing nationally, but also thinking like, where can you and your communities focus locally and at the state level?
That's good.
And you can make a difference.
You can.
Yeah, I had a class, an advanced PR class that elected the first Latinx school board member, and they ran their campaign. And they did it in a semester, and she got elected in a very small rural Arkansas town. And so you have the abilities and the natural talents to make a difference. So just make sure to hear that from us today, is that you can engage and have a deep impact.
Well, on that note, we want to invite you if you have any questions for the panelists. We have a few minutes.
Hi, my name is Raisha. I study political science at Sciences Po in France, but I'm doing an exchange here at Barnard. And I'm a panelist tomorrow, and I'm talking about like how fitness is also a way to perpetuate inequalities because of how fitness trends go from the west to the east, and if they go from the east to the west, they often appropriate it. I'm a yoga instructor, so some interest in that space. And I'm curious about how do you see entrepreneurship and business as a way to enact social justice? That's the question.
I can take that.
Yeah.
A lot of companies now have corporate social responsibility. So you hear people talk about it often, and it's shifting a bit. So you want to talk about after the murder of George Floyd and about how many people issued statements and plans for social justice mandates and what was happening. And we're watching right now in real time as all of those things are being rolled back and basically some form of erasure. But there are still some companies, and as you guys are looking for your fit in places where you might be employed, even if you don't see it on their websites, during your interview processes and during your conversations, I challenge you to ask substantial questions about what their commitments are to their communities and to investment and to environmental safeties. I often ask people about climate change just to mess them up when I'm in a conversation. It has nothing to do with anything I'm talking about, but I just go ahead and say, do you believe, do you not believe? That kind of thing. And so you can gauge people's sensitivity and awareness and just basic knowledge in this space by asking questions that are important to you about, the conversations the values that you want to hear espoused. So there are some big companies that are doing still good work, even though they're quietly maybe taking down the statements, the superficial part of it. But to get past that, you have to ask questions of the employers. And so earlier I said you've got to lean into discussions. But we've seen a lot of espoused values. Now you see them and now you don't. And so if you're going to hold companies accountable, small nonprofits, all of that run the gamut in terms of the possibilities. So I do think that corporate social responsibility is still a thing. But how it's communicated and where it's communicated and to whom it's communicated may be a bit more elusive.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking with us. I really resonated with the conversation about student activism. And I guess my question is, how do you calculate or make decisions about showing up for people who are more vulnerable or more underserved than you are, but at the same time taking into account your own precarity as well? I'm an international student, and I've seen in real time how we're almost pawns or the first line of defense, and most institutions have turned their back against us. So in such an uncertain time, how do you decide on what kind of risks you should be taking?
Yeah, that is. I've been thinking about that a lot.
I think we all have.
Right, we all, we
Yeah.
definitely, because we have international students who we want to protect and we want them protected, right? And particularly in my context in North Carolina, we have a really significant population of Hispanic students who are, I mean, my goodness, they're being targeted right now. So much so that we've even had to we're having workshops with our students, and we're bringing in immigration lawyers, and we're trying to, because people need to know. For one, people just need to know, well, what are my rights, right? And that's one of the questions that we ask when the lawyers come in. We say, okay, so then what can we do on behalf of our students? How can we protect them? What do we do? And so the first thing really is getting as much information as you can about what are your rights, what are the options that you have. But for me, I am so concerned about our students, and so I'm probably a little bit too cautious, because I'm just okay, maybe we should just let these students lay low for right now, right? Because I know that people are really concerned and want to be out and want their voices heard for what we know is right, but at the same time, this is real. And so if I'm going to be honest with you, I fear for our students. I fear, well, for all students, not just our students, but I really do. And so I am really not sure. I'm really not sure. Is it wise to say, yeah, let them lay low so that they don't get in trouble, they don't, put themselves in danger? Or is it wise to say, no? I don't know. What do you?
I was going to say, I'm in this in real time, and I was talking to Dr. Thomas earlier about it, because I fund international students as part of our graduate program. And so this year, it's the latest that I've ever made offers, because I was conflicted, right? And not that I didn't have the funds, but I knew it's a hostile environment, right?
It is.
And so finally on Sunday, I sent letters saying, you have funding and you're welcome to come. And as I was traveling here, I got an email from our general counsel that said, you must advise international students that they need an immigration attorney.
That's right.
And if you're trying to get here, where on earth are you going to get an immigration attorney that can advise you on whether or not you should take the risk?
Yeah.
I called several of my international colleagues because I was gatekeeping. The maternal part of me was saying, I'm not going to bring people here that I can't care for.
That's right.
But he said, this could change people's lives. And so you stick to your rubric, award the students that were the most competitive, and let them make the decision, right? But it took me well over 2 months after my normal admissions process because I felt personally responsible. And so I say this to you because you asked about, safety first. That's the first thing, is that I would always tell you to be safe. The second thing is you have to decide what the cost is for you. Neither one of us can tell you that this is something you should protest or you should stand. You have to decide what the cost is for you. If it's okay for you to be sent home and you're willing to get out there, for some people they may hold that perspective, and in that case they should protest, right? If at all costs you feel like whatever the darkest consequences is okay, but you have to consider your safety. And not just your physical safety, your emotional safety, your spiritual safety, the safety of all the things that you're engaging in. And so, we take these things lightly, but I've lost a lot of sleep thinking about my international students. I think they make us stronger. I think they make us better as a program. I think it's important that they help me to create global citizens. And so you have value, you have a purpose. And even if the world today is saying for not such a time as this, you look at me and you know that I say you have value, you have purpose. But you have to think about safety and think about the ways in which you want to engage. But I have lost many nights of sleep in the last 60 days worrying about the same thing. Do I fund people that I can't protect? I went ahead and said yes because they decide, they decide. But it is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And it's a tough season. You're welcome.
I was just going to add one tiny
Oh,
little
yes,
thing.
sure. And
So
then you.
I also follow on team stay inside, lock your doors, don't go outside. But I guess the one thing, whether we're talking about activism or just sort of even thinking about what you'll do in your professional lives, is that institutions will always protect themselves and not you.
Yeah, that's true.
So, in your calculus, it's also important. It's also important to have community. Your community might need to include some lawyers, right? But I guess universities will persist and will do what they need to do to protect themselves. Other institutions will also do what they need to do to protect themselves. And so, in terms of thinking about resources that are communicated relative to what might actually happen, the other thing I'll say is, due process is great, but I feel like we've entered an era where the norms of due process are not being followed. So I'm not even sure those are things you can rely on. So protect yourself in all of the ways.
I just wanted to add this. When we say protect yourself, we also want to acknowledge that you are deeply embedded in a larger familial and communal context as well, beyond just where you are here. And so it's such a complexity to have to think about yourself, and protecting yourself. But then you have to think in terms of, I am also here because I am the hope and the dream of those connected to me. There's just, so just wanted to acknowledge that, the complexity of that.
I'll get to you. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. And my name is Sanjana. I am a junior at Michigan State University studying biology and bioethics. And I am also with my research team over here. We're all teaching assistants, and our research focuses on how we can understand our teaching patterns, specifically in the context of racial and focusing lens, to understand how maybe our teaching methods haven't promoted the most equitable classrooms in STEM education. And a lot of our work is personal research, but we do also look at a lot of the right kind of literature and media sources. It's not just TikTok or Instagram. And in a lot of our conversations, we've talked about how a lot of these authors come in with pretty biased perspectives, and they're able to get their media or their literature put out from very credible sources. And so we would have a lot of back and forth conversations about how media and things that we're learning could maybe enforce certain perspectives. And it's up to us to take that time to vet the resources and see if they're right or not. And so I just wanted to understand a little bit more about your take on how we can understand when there's that bias in literature and media, and how we can navigate finding the right kind of information.
That's a tall order, but but let me just say thanks for the question. First, it is a challenge, right? And so you're going to have to go. There's some big folks, like there's John Hopkins and some of the major people that you go to for the research within public health and within your area. But I'm going to make a plug for HBCUs, right, and some HSI institutions who have researchers who are doing this work, but you may not see it in some of the more predominant premier journals, right? But they have a Callaloo, which is a small, journal that Duke is actually printing, for these particular communities. Yeah. And so I think it's important that you connect. The connectivity is the interdisciplinary, interinstitutional relationships that's going to help you validate what you have. I'm a communicator and I'm in media professions, but the people who are part of my research team are anthropologists and bioethics people. And so I work across discipline, right? So that they can help me to validate, what it is that I'm trying to communicate. Like I'm the communicator of the bunch, but their job is the hard science of it. And for me to find people, to bring people, I'm also the facilitator, to bring people together, research that normally would not probably be elevated to this level. And so you have to be really intentional and very strategic about it. But I would tell you, just because it's not in a tier 1 journal doesn't mean it's not excellent research. And so you need to unbias yourself in terms of looking at where you can find things. And then, see who's producing it. And look at their credentials. And you decide if they can contribute to the conversation or not. But I do... we're biased. These are the journals for what we do. And if you don't publish in here, you won't have anything to say. And then we invalidate people. And unfortunately, people of color have had this experience, historically. It's a hard time for us to get in some of the tier 1s. But it doesn't make our scholarship and the research less impactful or accurate. Go off. I won't call them a second tier publications, but I'll say go offbeat and find some diverse, publications and see what you find. But I'm delighted that you are asking the questions and that you guys are having the conversation about that care. I haven't been able to mention it, but I want to just sidebar just for a quick second. One of the projects that I'm working on in real time is HIV in the South. And it is a public health epidemic, ridiculous crisis that you have not seen in any media.
That's right.
In fact, right now I'm studying where are people talking about it, and nobody's talking about it. In my own state, we have a rising number of people who are HIV positive that are both 13 to 23. So that's in your age, and also 65 and up, right? Yeah. So my seniors are becoming more positive and been exposed to HIV, and my youth are being more exposed at a greater risk, right? And so I find it appalling that this is a public health crisis in the state of Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia. It's in the South. And that I've been taking graduate students and thinking about campaigns and communication plans to let young people know that HIV is on the rise in the state of Mississippi. And so I'm doing it both from an applied research, practical aspect, but I will also create, some kind of academic manuscript to go with why the information is missing from all media sources. I've got grad students looking at TikTok, Instagram. Nobody's talking about AIDS on HIV on TikTok. It's just not happening. But it should be, because it's this demographic that's greatly affected in this time, particularly in the South. So you got to ask yourself, why is it the South? Like, what is happening politically and culturally that has created the space for this? And so, we could talk about it at dinner, at the table and that kind of conversation. But I want you to know the work is important because, again, as I said earlier, it's not just what is actually being elevated in the conversation, it's what's missing.
Yeah.
And so it's incredible. For a long time, Black women have had the highest rates of HIV in the United States. And you don't hear that either, right? And so it's true. Like, we get the worst of everything. But even now, it's a younger group and an older group who's impacted, and southern states are at epidemic proportions. There's been tours and conversations in Texas, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and also Louisiana to explain and warn how the numbers are soaring through the roofs. But you've read nothing. I've been looking at media outlets and non-traditional outlets for the last year, and it's not happening. The conversation is not there. It's not present.
Wow.
That's right.
Thank you for that sidebar. We'll have our last question from this very patient participant.
Hello, it's such a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm Fatima. Sorry, it's just I've researched so much about all of your works online. I find it kind of hard to believe I'm actually seeing all of you in person right now. And I wanted to ask, every single, a lot of the work that you all do and all of the work that all of the amazing people in this room right now, a lot of our work is rooted within community.
Yes.
So I really wanted to ask, as our closing off question, if there was one piece of advice that you've learned in your upbringing, or if there's one specific lesson that kind of shaped you into the person that you are today, that one lesson or that one piece of advice that kind of has led you throughout your passions, throughout your careers, what would that piece of advice be?
Mine is really easy. It's from my grandpa, and he's 97, and he's still living, and he just retired from his job literally last year. He's amazing, absolutely amazing. So he's seen a whole lot, right? And I remember when I was a child, he was a listener. And so he was always listening to people. But what freaked me out, I kid you not, was that he would also listen to people who were on, the total opposite political spectrum than he was. And I remember as a little girl, I was at least old enough to know that, these folks don't believe like Granddad believes. And so I said, Granddaddy, why are you listening to these people? They're spewing a lot of hatred and, racist things. He said, you always listen to people, no matter what. Because really, if you think about it, that's why we're in the mess we're in now, right? We're not really hearing one another. We're at each other. We're at each other's throats. And we'll write each other off as soon as, if it may be a triggering word someone says that kind of falls in line with whatever stereotype we have of them as being someone who's on an opposite political spectrum than we are, or ideological spectrum than we are. And so that whole importance of listening really has shaped me as an individual, but then also as a scholar. Because that's why, when I go into communities and I teach my classes, if we're going into a community, the first thing that you have to do is you first go in to listen, not to go in as the expert, because, we got all this training. We're amazing people. Here's
my data.
We're researching. We got the data. We got it. We're yes, we're experts, right? So we think, but but we are not experts in the lives of the folk in that particular context. And so the first thing, if nothing else, is to just sit and listen. And so part of what I've been able to do, and I'm really excited about doing more. I want to do more. My research team, we're working on that, is having listening sessions in communities. And what was really amazing in the first one that we had, and this was in rural North Carolina, and with a minoritized population, and one of the women said, you know, folks who come from the university, she said, y'all, they never come and listen to us. So just the power of you going in and listening makes so much difference, because I mean, that's like the root of, collaboration, right? The root of building these bridges so that when you go in, you really are going in and offering something that is helpful, because you sat and understood, because it's a listening to understand, right? Like, it's not just a perfunctory kind of listening, like, okay, we had our listening session, so this is what we want to do, right? Like, kind of what you already had established, but a listening to understand, and allowing your listening to shape what you do and shape how you do what you do. So my research plan, so we listen first, and then we write, then you can write your, do your research design, which is not quite how it's done a lot of times, right? A lot of people get funding, and you get funding for a particular research problem, and you go in and, so hands down, listening.
I would echo that, but kind of with a different audience. So part of the work that I do involves like collaborating with actual election administrators. So if you've been paying, it's a choice. And so like if you've been paying attention to the news, a lot of them have come under increasing like threats of violence. Overwhelmingly, that population of public servant is women. So a lot of the threats are sexualized, like I will not go into further detail. And then among the local election officials who are people of color, they're also racialized, and they say all sorts of terrible things. But so, when those individuals allow me as an academic to come into their space, like, I'm very respectful of it. But before that, one of the complaints they regularly have about academics is, one, we have a lot of ego, yes. But two, we're takers in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, like we go into people's environments and we want things from them and we get things from them, but without actually establishing any sort of authentic professional, in my case, professional relationship with people before thinking about how what they might do might intersect with what I do. So, yeah. I mean, what's worked well for me is networking without a goal in mind, which I guess isn't what networking is technically supposed to be. But a lot of the opportunities I've had to do collaborative applied research are just because, like, I'm just bopping around a conference. I'm very peppy, if you all don't know. It's just because I've been bopping around a conference, just having regular conversations with people, and then you know, it's kind of the same people over and over again. It's like a churn, right? So you see the same people in different places, which then allows you to establish a relationship. So then, like, if there is time where there is an ask, it doesn't feel like you are a taker because you have established a relationship with this person when you didn't want anything other than, I don't know, maybe another glass of wine at the bar. I don't know. Don't drink. The other thing I'll say also that I got from my grandfather, which he did not mean in like the context of work, and it's nothing particularly new or like, it's just the good old, like, one monkey don't stop no show. Are we all familiar?
I know that's right.
Right,
Yes.
So, but like, when I think about it professionally, I think about, okay, so this journal rejected you because your things aren't general interest enough. I don't even know what that means. But we submit it here, and they will accept, we hope, right? Or like when you get a grant rejected, okay, NSF, you don't like me, that's fine. So I'll go over and submit it here. So I think, in the context of work, I think about it as basically just like perseverance, continuing to persist, and like just recognizing that like the thing that the academy or the world might say is like very niche, there are like actual people who are also interested in it and think that it's value. It might take a while to find those people, but once you do, it's great.
Dr. Wilson, I have a 97-year-old grandmother. I don't know if your grandfather is available.
Oh no!
but we might need to introduce them because they sound like they could be interesting.
Oh, friends.
They can be friends.
Yeah.
For sure. But I hear where you're going with that. And I just want to say I was raised by a single mother. And so I have strong women, very strong matriarchal roots. And those things keep me grounded. And so as a young person, as a journalist, you could see how I might always be asking why questions. Why questions? And I asked my grandmother, I said, why is this such and such? And she looked at me and she said, child, it's enough stuff you don't know to make a whole nother world.
Yes.
A whole nother world, right? And so that frames my curiosity. It also grounds my feet, like in terms of the humility into how I come to the work. And so they've been describing, community-based research practices and how they connect with people and how they're intentional about listening and understanding people's positionality. When you have humility and when you've been socialized with that, you can do this. When you don't, and you come in with, I'm the expert, I'm the people, you should tell me your story because of who I am, you will be unsuccessful. Yeah. But I stand on the shoulder of many, many strong women, strong Black women who tell me, you don't know nothing, child, in an instance. And I was joking with the panel earlier because my mother called me and said that she didn't want my hair to be out of sorts. I won't quote her, and I won't tell you my age, but I'm over 50. But my mother still said, do not get up there with your hair looking crazy, girl. Little girl, right? And so you have to just remember that humility takes me into lots of spaces and into lots of communities with lots of people who have something to teach me, who have something to say, who can really help develop my understanding and how I work and communicate with people. So whomever that is for you, wherever those mentors are, take advantage. And I think this is a great opportunity for you guys to share.
Well, I think we have to end there, but before we do that, I want to thank you all for being here and being engaged in the great work that you are doing that we can't wait to hear about tomorrow. And I want to thank the panel for trusting me with this invitation to come do this thing that I brought them all from the South. I'm like, okay, it took like nearly a full day to get here, for everyone. So thank you all so much for being here. And I'll turn it.
Thank you again. Thank you, all of you, for your words. I was over in the corner trying to scribbling on a bunch of pieces of paper, turn this way, that way, just trying to capture what I think we heard and synthesize a bit. And for me, one of the first things that really popped out was your words, Dr. Wilson, on listening to the most vulnerable and then extrapolating out to broader populations in almost a universal design sense seems like a first way to think about the work. And I am excited to hear from you all tomorrow about the ways that you are focusing on particular people, particular populations, particular challenges, and what we can all learn from that. And then can your I think I got this right, time, talent, treasure, and thinking about being wise about our investments of time, our investments of talent, our investments of treasure, how we think about making our own time treasure, our very selves vulnerable on behalf of others, how we calculate the risks, and when you invest yourself is a question of the moment. And I think from all of our research, it's a question of every moment. Yeah. Right? But for some people, that moment is right now. And for many of us, we sort of carry those calculations. The calculus is changing every 5 minutes. Then there was this notion of leveraging the systems that are at play, particularly our elected officials, and how we're applying all of our own time, energy, resources. But we also need not forget about people who we've put in positions to advocate on our behalf, and how we press them, in ways that help us to sustain the moment, right? I think this notion of having more than just a spark, right? Like, there are sparks all around us. What will get traction? What will be lasting? And how can we influence those things that last? And then we went to this moment around your point sort of jokingly about not liking to work. Same. At the same time, same. But I'm at work right now, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But this is indeed work. Environmental justice requires work. Many of the things that you all are researching about, that we'll be talking about at dinner and over tomorrow and over the course of all of our lives, for some of us, really require a lot of work, and the work is not for the faint of heart. So this notion that rest and rejuvenation are actually mission critical, literally critical to the mission, are the ways that we refresh ourselves. This feels particularly refreshing for me, particularly invigorating. I hope that many people, that all of the students will hear something over the next day or so that feels particularly rejuvenating. In the spirit of networking, I hope you find some people here, that you brought your people with you in spirit or in actuality, and that there are lots of relationships and networks that can be cultivated here at the conference. I add my countless personal thanks. The topic is one that's really near and dear to me. I'm very grateful that we're taking this up. Again, my thanks to colleagues who have contributed to this conference and have made it a fantastic one already. A particular thanks to Karina Sandoval.
Karina.
Very, very grateful to Karina for her efforts. If you are in the right place or the things work, it is in part due to Karina. And then also to Anime Gubbins. Where did Anime go?
Yeah.
Oh, right there. Similarly, if the conference goes off without a hitch and things are working and it all makes sense, we're very grateful to Anime for her efforts in that sense. I'm told to remind people about dinner, right? So some of us are invited to dinner, and we'll be going straight away over to the faculty club. We'll lead over to the faculty club. Thank you all again. Congratulations on being here. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to dinner and then to seeing people tomorrow.